Welcome, welcome. This is Marnie. Excited to have you here with us, as well as our guest today, Dana Shea Williams. We're going to be talking about communicating with clarity and courage in conflict. And this is so important because we want to go through and understand what God has in his heart for us during those seasons of conflict. We're going to talk about the 4 types of communicators, how conflict is our teacher, how to stop blaming and start being truly honest, how and why you should ask versus accuse, the 3 E's of listening, the truth about feeling connected in relationships, and this truth might surprise you, also the real purpose of communication and how to express your needs so you can finally be heard. Our guest today is Dana Shea Williams. She's a speaker, marriage coach, and podcast host who encourages, empowers, and inspires women to step up more confidently and courageously in their lives and relationships. You can learn more about her over at her own website, danashea.com. Also, she's available to speak at your upcoming events through womenspeakers.com. I'm super excited to welcome you here now. Welcome, Dana.
Hi, Marnie. So happy to be here with you today.
Oh, excited to have you here. And I've been looking forward to this. Who likes conflict? Nobody likes conflict, but knowing what to do during conflict could be super helpful. So I'm glad you're here.
Absolutely. I'm ready to get into this conversation.
That's great. Well, I noticed that you, one of the many things you do is marriage counseling. And of course, for those of us who are in marriage, we recognize that conflict has to come up from time to time. As long as you have 2 people, you're going to have some conflict from time to time. But it's not just there. Sometimes it's in the church. Sometimes it's at work. Even with our sisters or whoever else we hang out with, conflict comes up. And so you have this way of helping us identify the kind of communicators we're dealing with. And maybe before you tell us the 4 kinds, why does it help to understand that there are 4 kinds?
Well, it's interesting because we are the product of our environment, how we grew up, what you saw modeled before you. And most of us don't have like the language or even the self-awareness to think about what kind of communicator am I? It just happens when there's a conflict, it just naturally comes out. So when we're not aware of the type of communicator that we are, then we are more apt to clash with our partner, with our friend, with our team member, whoever it is that we're in a conversation with.
Okay. All right. So dive us in. Communication type number 1.
Yes. Okay. So there are 4 different types. And so the first type is the passive communicator. This is the person who thinks, I don't matter. So they would be someone who, when you ask, hey, where do you want to go for dinner? It's, well, it doesn't matter, wherever you want to go. That person is typically conflict avoidant. So that's the first person, the passive communicator. A lot of times women are naturally kind of bred to be more passive. And especially in Christian circles, because we've gotten the whole like submission conversation wrong, I think. So the passive communicator, again, is someone who doesn't necessarily prioritize their needs or their desires. They're more passive.
Okay.
The second type would be the aggressive communicator. So imagine a quadrant. This person is on the opposite end of that quadrant.
Yeah.
The aggressive communicator is someone who says, I matter, you don't. So, right? It's like the exact opposite of what the passive person says. These are people that most of us don't really like to be around. And then the third type of communicator is the passive aggressive communicator. So the passive aggressive communicator pretends that you matter. And honestly, they oftentimes have a hard time because there's the passive side of them. There's that side that doesn't necessarily know their desires, or maybe they feel like they're unworthy to share. But instead of just kind of avoiding conflict like the passive communicator, they will do something that will, it's like that inward turmoil, that inward resentment that will come out. This is the person who says, oh no, everything's great. And then they go key your car.
Yeah.
That's the of communicator. And then finally, we have our goal, which is the assertive communicator. And this is someone who is about collaboration. They say, I matter and you matter. So it's not just you matter. It's not just I matter, but it's how can we work together? How can we collaborate together to come up with a solution that works for both of us?
I love that. I love that. And we're going to kind of dig into this more as we go here. So hang with us here. So let's talk about conflict being the teacher. So we're having a conversation that turns into something that feels not so great anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So conflict is our teacher because it exposes really our triggers. The word trigger is kind of like a buzzword in our culture right now. But the truth is that if we can look at conflict as not something to be avoided, not something to be afraid of, but we can really look at it. Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, not the peacekeepers." And so when we are in conflicts, we have to realize that if we are able to learn from it, if we're able to say, wow, why did I get so angry at that comment? Why did I feel so disrespected when that coworker said that to me? When we can really start to learn more about ourselves, then really it opens us up for the Christian. It opens us up to discipleship, to say, okay, Lord, there's an area of weakness in me that I wasn't aware of. Now, would you show me how I can actually master that and not allow this conflict to then master me?
Yeah, I remember a conference we were at one time, and we were learning about this, and they were like, so when you get all stirred up, does it feel good? And we would all, 1,000 or however many of us, would say no. And then they'd say, but is it good to get stirred up? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
Because otherwise that stuff that gets stirred up when we are in those situations just stays under there, kind of festering like an infection. But when it comes to the surface, we have the opportunity to get a tweezer, let God get that out for us, and then it's gone. We can actually, like dross coming to the surface of gold, you can either stir it back in or you can get it off of there and purify that gold.
Absolutely. One thing I tell my coaching clients a lot, people will say things like, well, we're in this conflict and my spouse is bringing the worst out of me and I don't like that. And I'm like, well, you should. Like, you should want that out of you. Why would you want the worst to stay in you? And so God
I
is so
love that.
right. Like
Yeah,
God
no,
is
yeah,
so
yeah.
good because he will connect us with people,
Yeah.
rub us the wrong way.
Yeah.
That iron that sharpens iron. I often say when you've got these two iron plates sharpening each other, there's going to be some friction, there's going to be some tension.
Yeah.
So again, conflict is not bad. Conflict actually helps us to become more like Christ if we'll learn from it.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to run, instead lean in a little bit. Okay. How do we stop blaming and start being truly honest? And what does that even look like?
So many of us have been again taught that there's a fault, right? So if there's a conflict, someone's at fault. So most of us, we're not going to be at fault. So that means you naturally have to be at fault. And so when we're in conflict and when we're in conversation, we got to even take out that whole idea that someone is at fault, that someone is wrong. Sometimes no one is wrong. We just see things from different perspectives. So if we're driving down the street, Marnie, and you and I are, let's say we're in the same car together, we see a car accident in front of us and the police come and they're interviewing us. Well, I'm going to tell you what I saw based on my perspective as the driver. You're going to tell the police what you saw based on your perspective as the passenger. Neither one of us are wrong. Both of us are right. We just have a different perspective. So when we come into conversations, it's important that we understand that there's no one at fault. Even if someone has done something irresponsible, there's no need to blame, because blaming does not move us closer to our goal, which is connection, which I know we're going to talk about in a little bit. So if we can just even get out of our mindset that someone is at fault or that there has to be someone to blame, then I think that we will set ourselves up for a better foundation to start having more productive conversations.
Yeah. And I think that the only way to do that is to come in with the idea that I'm not here to win.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The Bible says that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the powers of the darkness, right? So when I'm, again, coaching my couples here, I will often tell them, you are on the same team.
Right.
The Bible talks about in 1 Corinthians 13 that love keeps no record of wrongs. It doesn't have a scoreboard. And, my whole family, we're very athletic. All my kids play sports. And I always use these sports analogies. And so I often say the only time a scoreboard is present is when there's opposing teams. There's not a scoreboard at practice because you're on the same team. Everyone's working on their drills or working on their jump shots and things like that. So there's no scoreboard needed because everyone there understands we are all on the same team. When you bring the scoreboard out and when we start pointing fingers and blaming, then that just shows that you've now made yourself an enemy of the person that you're supposed to be trying to connect with.
I love that. Beautiful analogy. Just so clear, so clear. Okay, so how and why should you ask versus accuse?
I love talking about this. When we accuse, and a lot of times we don't know that we're accusing. We don't know that our tone is
Mm,
accusatory. We don't realize that we think we are asking. For example, let's say a spouse, husband and wife, the husband is late for work. And so he comes in and the wife twirls around and she goes, "Where were you?" Well, technically, she's asking a question, but her tone is very
right.
accusatory. So, what's going to happen in that situation is that husband is immediately on the defense. So he is not thinking, my wife wants information from me. She wants
Mhm.
to tell me that she was concerned. He's not thinking that at all. He's thinking, oh no, here comes the blame. Here comes the
Yeah.
accusation. And so he's defensive. And so now that conversation, which really hasn't even started yet, has already started on a wrong foot.
Mhm.
So when we learn how to ask questions, what we do is we put that other person in a position where they don't have to defend. We are literally coming in wanting information. So we are coming in as a student to say, help me understand this. I need some clarity on this particular topic. Not I have the answer and now you must defend
Yeah.
why that thing is true or not true.
Yeah, so many times we come in knowing the answer or knowing what we think the answer is, and then we ask a question, kind of an entrapment kind of a question. And what you're saying is the question actually has to be an honest question in order for it to maybe tell us a different scenario. Husband comes in late, wife is really curious.
Mhm.
What happened to you? And how do you say that in order to not raise the hackles?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between like you can for sure state how you feel, but to
Yeah.
not do it in a way that's accusatory. So
Yeah.
for a wife to say in that situation, for her to say, "Wow, you don't even care that I just spent 2 hours making dinner.
Yeah.
Where were you?" Right? That's very accusatory. He's defensive.
Right.
But if she were to say, "Oh my goodness, I was so worried about you because
Right.
I've
What
been trying
happened?
to reach you and you didn't answer your
Yeah.
phone. Is everything okay?"
Right.
That's a way different conversation.
Yeah.
So technically she's still saying, "Where are you?" But she's approaching it from a different perspective. So now the husband doesn't feel attacked, he doesn't feel shamed, he doesn't feel blamed. So now that conversation is going to be way more productive.
So much of what happens in our relationships goes by us because we don't listen to how we sound.
Yes.
Yeah. So we come across so accusatory and so maybe defensive ourselves or whatever, and maybe not trying to be that way, but that's how it's perceived on the other end.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Husband would tell me all the time, your tone. And I think, my tone is fine. There's nothing wrong with me. Or he would say, your facial expressions. And I'd be like, there's nothing wrong with my face. And he'd be like, you can't see your face. I can see your face.
Right.
It's the same with the tone. Like
It
we
is.
really sound. Have you ever heard yourself, Marnie, like on a voicemail or something? You're like, is that how my voice sound like that, but
Yeah.
that is how it is. And so again, going back to the conflict being our teacher, is that when your spouse, partner, friend, whoever gives you feedback, then
Yeah.
we've got to be willing to say, okay, thanks for that feedback. I didn't mean to sound that way. I didn't know that I looked angry, or
Yeah.
I didn't know that I was coming across that way. But instead of us getting defensive, we can receive that feedback and then adjust.
One of the things I started doing several years ago was watching for micro expressions and micro movements, like that when I'm speaking with someone. And it's really helped me to identify where I'm not communicating how I think I am. Somebody will kind of raise an eyebrow or, step back or just something small that makes me realize, okay, I said something or did something there that made them uncomfortable. And it's really helped because, again, you can't see what you look like to other people. You
Right.
cannot hear what you sound like to them. You only hear what you mean it to sound like, or you feel what you mean it to feel. So we kind of have to become a little bit of a student of this in order to improve the relationships. But there's so much hope here.
Yeah, absolutely. And this goes into listening, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk about, I hope I'm not like jumping ahead too
Yeah.
much.
No, we're going to do that right now. We got 3 E's of listening.
Perfect. You set that up so
Perfect.
beautifully. So when I'm coaching people on listening, because again, listening is a learned skill.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we feel like we're listening because we have hearing, like we're not hearing impaired. But there's a difference between hearing and then listening. And going back to looking for those kind of micro expressions, that is where I help people to understand what it means to listen with the first E, which is to listen with your eyes. So when you're listening with your eyes, you're watching for that slump of the shoulders. You're watching for that cross of the arm. You're watching for that person looking off in the distance when you're talking to them because you're focused on them. And this is why when someone is talking to us, we can't be on our phones or we can't be, checking an email and, nodding at them every so often because we're going to miss so many cues if we do that. So the first E in listening is listening with your eyes. Listen undistracted. The second E is listening with your ears. And again, this is what we feel like comes natural for us because unless you have a hearing impediment, you can hear, right? So when you listen with your ears, you're listening for what is being said, but also what's not being said. So you're listening for, I think about my kids, my 17-year-old son, he likes to talk to me, but he leaves a lot out a lot of the times. So I have to listen to what he's saying, but then listen to what he's not saying so that I know how to respond. So listening with your ears. And then the third E is listening with empathy. And when we listen with empathy, we are able to put ourselves in the shoes of another. Not how would that feel to me, but how must that feel for them?
Yeah.
So going back to my 17-year-old, he told us about a situation, my husband and I, we were having a conversation and he told us about a situation in his life that's been a big deal for him. Now, as a grown woman, that's not a big deal for me, right? So it'd be easy for me to be like, it's not a big deal. You're 17, these people aren't even going to matter in your life in 10 years, but that's not what he did. He needed for me to go, oh my gosh, wow, take myself back to myself at 17.
Right.
Wow. I understand how difficult that must be. That must be really hard. What do you think that you should do? Or how are you going to respond to that? That's listening with empathy. It's not like most people don't need you to tell them what you would do, but they just want you to sit and feel. Just, can you feel what I'm going through right now? Can you hear my heart? Can you understand what I'm going through? And that's how we learn to listen with empathy.
I love that. I wasn't sure where you were going with that 30. I thought it might be emotions, but empathy is great. And I love how when you're talking to your son also, again, you did not try to jump in and solve it for him. Instead, you're walking the journey beside him, not trying to take the journey from him or, get him to go down a certain path. It's so important that we come alongside people instead of being down their throat.
Totally. Absolutely. And again, I hate to like rag on us Christians sometimes, Marnie, but so many times because we're like, I got that word. Like, I know what you need. And it's like, I love the word, I preach it. It's amazing. But that's not what people need in that moment.
Absolutely.
Jesus is so great at this. Like, he was the word.
Yes.
But he met people where they were. And that's why people loved him, because he truly cared about them and he showed it. And I think when we're able to do that, then people are more receptive. We've all heard the age-old adage, right? It doesn't matter how much you know unless people know how much you care.
You care.
And so
true.
We've got to first let people know, like, I care, I see you, I understand, I feel you. And now, okay, then we can get to the solution when it's appropriate.
Absolutely. Love it. Love it. Love it. I want to talk next about the truth about feeling connected in relationships and why this particular thing might be a surprise.
Yes. Okay. So many of us feel like when we're in relationship with people, that connection should just come naturally, and it's so funny when I'm coaching premarital couples, they're so cute, because they're in this stage of their marriage or their relationship where everything is great. They don't see each other's like dark sides, everything is great. And that infatuation wears out. It's supposed to, it's never supposed to be permanent. And then you start to really get to know a person. And then you feel like, oh my gosh, we're growing apart. Well, the truth of the matter is disconnection is actually the default, not connection. Connection does not happen organically. And that's something that a lot of people they don't realize. They think that the default is connection and then we just grew apart. Where actually, if you leave two people by themselves without any sort of intentional work, the default is going to be the disconnect. And so when we realize that, oh, wow, like because of our sin nature, we are always going to be driven apart. We've got to be intentional to come back together. And this is where coaching comes in. This is where people being really self-aware and working on their relationships. This is where all that work happens, because we realize that there are things that you can do. I see couples who are very disconnected. I mean, like literally at the brink of destroying their relationships. And once they learn the skills and the tools on how to bridge that disconnection gap, then things start working again. And so all hope is not lost. And this is why, again, conflict is not, it's not scary. It's not to be avoided. When you're in conflict, you have to realize that, okay, this is a stage that we're in this relationship right now. Now, what do we do intentionally to bridge that disconnection gap to work toward connection?
I know for my husband and I have been married for 40 years. And one of the things that bothered me along the way was how many marriage books have you, what I would say, have you conforming to one another's image. And that's never God's goal. His goal is for us to conform to his image and then to come together as a couple. And my favorite, one of my favorites ever, Rick and Julie Gorman's, they focus on, okay, where can we find here that we agree already? When we start talking about this topic that we know we have different perspectives on, where can we find that we both can say, well, I totally agree with you there. So they start the other way around. And I love that, because so many times the counsel and the advice that's given to couples is, let's look at where you disagree. And we start from the wrong premise. Like you say, we start from the default of separation and we work toward connectiveness. But actually, we have this opportunity to start with connectivity and move forward from there if we choose to focus on that.
Yes, yes, yes. I love that so much. You know, where do we have common ground?
Right.
And there's going to be things that we're never going to agree on. And honestly, the purpose of communication is not agreement. The purpose of communication is connection. It's understanding.
Right. Exactly.
So I might not ever agree with you on that. And that's okay. We don't have to be disconnected because we don't agree. But now I understand, you know, think about what happened in 2020. The world fell apart, right?
Yeah.
And you had so many different disagreements on so many big topics, right?
Yeah.
And these relationships that were so close at once, people found themselves totally disconnected because we have been taught we have to agree. And that's just not the truth.
Yeah, I love that. And in fact, if we always agree, then one of us isn't necessary.
True.
It's so wonderful to actually be able to have a different perspective and move forward. My husband and I owned businesses together for for 14 years. We had a restaurant as well as a retail store that we owned and ran together. And what we found early on in those years of doing business together, which is different than doing family together, what we found was that we could do it his way or we could do it my way. But when we tried to marry those two approaches to business, it didn't work. We kept losing money. We kept making horrible decisions because we kept trying to compromise. And what we found was like, let's just hear both sides. Let's pick a direction and let's go. That's what worked for us. So I think that you're right. There's kind of a lie that you have to agree about everything. And it's not healthy. Actually, you can't do it. First of all, one of you is lying. So, and it's usually the same person that ends up lying the whole time. Like, I'll just agree with you. Sounds best, you know, so it's not really a healthy place to be. So you talked earlier about, the goal is actually connection, the real purpose for communication.
That's right. It's connection. It's not agreement. It's not, you know, I need you to see my side. That's a lot of times how we come into conversations. We'll even tell ourselves, I need them to see my side. Okay, I see your side and I still disagree. Now what? You know? And so if we can come to conversations understanding that the purpose of this conversation is so that I can have a deeper understanding of you. And this works really well in the workplace. Like I know we've talked a lot about marriage, but even in the workplace, that there are going to be people who do things differently. We have different personalities, we have different work styles, we have different Enneagram style, all the things, right? Like all the differences that we bring to the table. So if we come in saying, okay, the reason that we're having this particular conversation is because I need to understand how you saw that. Why did you make that decision? What was going on in your mind that made that decision more important than this decision? Instead of me coming in and being like, you need to learn how to prioritize better. Well, maybe they are prioritizing, but their priorities are different. And again, if we listen with empathy and if we ask more questions, oh my goodness, then we'll learn, hey, wow, okay. So they made this decision because their priority list is different than mine. Again, it's not bad, it's just different. So, okay, how can we then work together to find a solution that's going to work best for this team, or that's going to work best for how you like to do things, but in the timeline that you've been given to do that?
Yeah.
And when we're able to do that, that's when you create people who are team players, people who feel validated, they feel valued, they feel a part of the process, versus them feeling like there's something wrong with them because they now need to somehow come over to this other person's side.
Yeah. Right. So what do you do in a conversation where you actually do need them to hear your perspective and you know that theirs is different?
Again, parenting, right? Like sometimes as parents, I mean, of course, God has given you the wisdom to know what's right. But your children it's all in the way, it's all in your approach. It's all in the way that you go about it. There are going to be times that a decision just has to be made. And there's not a lot of, we can't sit here for 3 months and go back and forth. Like, however, I think that you can still communicate your heart. Like, this is why I believe in this decision. This is why this is good for you. This is why this is good for the family, whatever the situation is. But still encourage their input as much as you can. Maybe they're not going to make the final decision, or maybe they just need to be heard. So when you can let people know, this is the direction that we're going to go in, but I really do want to make sure that you're okay with this. I really do want to make sure that you're on board with this. So are there any questions that I can help answer for you? Or is there anything that I can do that would help you to feel more comfortable with this decision? And again, if people feel valued in that way, then a lot of times it's like, okay, you know what? That's not my choice. I didn't necessarily want to do it that way, but they feel cared for. And so now they're on board.
Yeah, love that so much. Okay, last question. How do you express your needs so that you're finally heard?
Again, it's all about the approach. So expressing your needs is so important in a relationship. Again, we've been taught that your needs don't matter. It's all about the other person. That is not true. Jesus took time away from his disciples and all the needy folks because he needed that time of refreshment, that time of renewal. He needed to be with his Father. And so we have to be able to express our needs to the people that we're in relationship with, but it's all about our approach. My needs are not more important than your needs, but my needs are important. Your needs are not more important than my needs, but your needs are also important. This is where, going back to our original conversation, we were talking about that assertive communicator. Your needs matter and my needs matter. And so it's so important that we do this, because when we're not honest, really, when we're not able to tell people this is what I need, what happens is we build up that resentment. And resentment is one of those killers, really, of a relationship, of any relationship. When you've got that silent resentment, that silent bitterness, we build up walls because you're unsafe, right? Because I can't be fully me around you. I have to somehow dumb myself down or deny my own needs. And so because of that, I really don't want to connect with you. And so it causes all of these problems that don't need to be there, when we would just simply learn how to say, these are my needs. These are the things that I need to have in this relationship. And what can I do for you? What are some things that you need for me to do so that we can both feel fulfilled in this relationship?
Yeah, I love that. It's so important. And for those of you who are more my age group, a little bit older, we were raised very much to not fight for our needs as much as the younger gals have learned this skill a little bit better than we did. It takes courage to do it, but just sit with Jesus, ask him to show you his heart for how to communicate, how to go forward, and then trust him that he is taking care of your needs. But oftentimes, I heard the illustration the other day. If you were going to make a chocolate cake and chocolate frosting for dessert, and your kids came in and said, what are you making? And you had all the ingredients out on the counter. You would speak what wasn't. You would speak what you could not see. By faith, you would say, well, we're going to have chocolate or cake and chocolate frosting for dessert. But then if the kids walked out of the kitchen and you just looked at the counter and said, okay, so God put together this chocolate cake for me and frosted. We know that that's not how this goes down. We have a part here to play.
Yeah.
And sometimes in our relationships, we're just waiting for God to come in and do something that isn't really his job to do. It's really our responsibility to be a beautiful, assertive heart. And to, again, I love how you say, my needs matter, your needs matter. Let's talk about how we can make this happen here. So this has been fantastic. Really great stuff, Dana. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Marnie. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and you guys want to totally go check out her website over at danashay.com. That's CHE.com. And also invite her to speak over at womenspeakers.com. Dana, if they go over to your website, what are they going to find over there?
Well, I'm actually, speaking of communicating in conflict, I have a course, an online course that I've developed that talk about a lot of these topics in more depth. And so just for your listeners today, Marnie, I have a special code. It's a $50 off the course if they just go to danashay.com/connection course and they enter in the promo code Marnie. So that's easy
nice.
to remember. Enter Marnie and they get $50 off the course.
That's awesome. So that's danashay.com/communicate
/connection course. So danashay.com.
Connection course. Okay, great. Yeah. Good. Okay, and Marnie is Marnie. And so you guys want to totally check that out. Again, it's such a delight to have you here.
Thank you so much, Marnie.
And thanks you guys for joining us. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next